Will Russia be punished for shooting down Azerbaijan plane? Why does Putin think Trump is weak? And how will the new American leader end the Russian-Ukrainian war next year? This and other topics we will discuss right now. My name is Uzlova, and Yuri Rashkin is together with us today. Yuri Rashkin, host of YouTube channel Rashkin Report, communication instructor of the University of Wisconsin, and county supervisor in Rock County, Wisconsin too. Yuri, hello, glad to see you very much.
Glad to see you, Irina, and welcome to our listeners and viewers everywhere.
And I know you have your own new English YouTube. Can you tell a few words about it to our viewers, and then they can subscribe on it?
You are so correct. Thank you for mentioning it. I really should be, I'd like to invite everyone to check out my Rashkin Report in English channel because since 2016, I've been recording interviews, doing my own commentary on Rashkin Report, mostly in Russian, since 2016. And now I decided to compile all the materials that have been done in English, as well as to add some of these wonderful podcasts that we're doing with Irina to to launch its own channel, Rashkin Report in English. So check it out, and I think you'll learn a few interesting things.
Thank you. And we ask our viewers subscribe to our YouTube channel, World Politics 24. Thank you all, guys, for joining. Azerbaijani President Ilham Aliyev confirmed that Russia shot down the plane that crashed in Aktau. The Azerbaijan president stated that there is already evidence in favor of this version, and it is based on facts. U.S. has evidence that Russians shot down Azerbaijan Airlines plane over Grozny, and United Kingdom calls for independent investigation into downing of Azerbaijan Airlines plane in Kazakhstan. Sky News reported. What should the world's reaction be to Russian shooting down of the Azerbaijan plane? How do you think, Yuri?
I think it's just another proof to those that have any questions about how safe it is to do business with Russia, or how safe it is to fly your airplanes over Russia, that it is not safe, and moreover, the consequences may not be what you think there should be, because when you're dealing with Russia, look how hard it's been to get Vladimir Putin to Hague because of shooting down off the plane, the Malaysia flight years ago, that was shot over Ukraine by separatist Russian troops, essentially. And that was a difficult process that is still ongoing. And in this instance, we're not going to see, we're seeing two essentially dictators who are going to resolve this situation between themselves. You have Azerbaijani strongman and Russian strongman who will have to work things out, and chances are they will, because it's a matter of just finding the right price that needs to be compensated. We don't know exactly what it is, but if people who fly these airlines feel somehow that now they're going to be safer, I think they're now going to be less safe. And I think it is incumbent on just anybody who's thinking about flying over Russia to also understand that the airline may not have all the information or can guarantee anything. It becomes a responsibility, even more so, of each person to decide, do I dare to take this flight, or is there a safer way somehow to get there? And that's just part of dealing with Putin and dealing with Russia. I think that lack of accountability that we need to just kind of be able to internalize. It's hard for us in the West to understand truly to what extent individuals don't matter in an authoritarian regime. So in this case, I guess a crash of an airplane just means that in negotiations between Russia and Azerbaijani leaders got some kind of a little bit of leverage because of this tragedy. But to think that there's going to be an upheaval and uproar, it's interesting to see that even the people who were in this catastrophe were reluctant to discuss what happened. So I think that all of just this is the fear of the fact that Russia essentially shut this plane and then they were left to hopefully crash somewhere and leave no witnesses. It just points so much to the reality of Russia today, and hopefully opens up the eyes of those that somehow think that there is a alternate Russian approach to things that is not the most deadly and dangerous and stupid way you can imagine doing anything.
But Putin apologized yesterday and said that it's very pity to him. Isn't it enough?
I think that Russian diplomats know all too well about the importance and the meaninglessness of expressing platitudes. They always speak about the West, oh, this is just a West expressing their concern. It means nothing, doesn't it? And here in the West, we feel that it means a lot because saying the right things is also very important. But in a dictatorship, saying the right things is really just a way to get somebody off your back. It's an excuse. Really, the hypocrisy of morals is that, something happened, this plane got shut down, and there's going to be a price to pay, possibly, or maybe not. That is none of our kind of business, but part of being proper. And we know Putin likes being proper. He puts a lot of his criminal activity into law. When he decides that to be president of Russia again, he makes it legal. He doesn't just hold on to power. He just makes it legal for him to hold on to power. So he likes proper moves and dance, the proper dance. So in this instance, he is expressing perhaps his sorrow, but he's not taking responsibility. And he is not, so in a way, him saying that this is sad could have been said by any world leader if there's no accountability and there's no responsibility for this terrible act being accepted. Because what are the consequences? What is to prevent this from happening again? That Putin will feel bad? That this is another reason, we don't want to shoot planes down because Putin feels bad. That doesn't seem like a warranty enough to prevent bad things from happening.
Donald Trump, since January, a threat or a chance for Ukraine, or both variants? And can we already state that Trump's promises to end the war in 24 hours turned out to be empty talk? And so what next?
Well, I think it's important to acknowledge that there was a pre-election rhetoric that was quite fiery and strong. And now rhetoric has certainly been toned down in many ways, not in all ways. It's been kind of redirected. Now, apparently, the fiery rhetoric is directed towards our neighbors, Canada, Mexico, other democracies in Europe, Denmark, for Greenland, and so on and so on. So we've been we changed what priorities are. And Ukraine in this setting feels like it is defending borders of Ukraine and preserving world order seems to be something from the past or recently approaching to be past, because we are observing at least the desires of strong men, or those who fancy themselves to be strong men, to divide the world into spheres of influence. This has been tried before when Hitler and Stalin and Molotov-Ribbentrop agreement, including secret agreements that we now know about, where they took Europe and divided into spheres of influence. And it's clear that Trump and Putin and Xi are working in some kind of a agreement to find their areas where Taiwan can be part of China, and Ukraine can be part of Russia, and Canada can be, 51st state of the United States. And this doesn't mean that it's going to be reality, but it can really hurt our relations with other countries. Because I'm visiting Canada right now, and it's amazing to me to see how relations with a country that is our closest neighbor, closest ally to the United States, it's always been so easy to go back and forth. And now this conversation, this talk about making Canada 51st state, perhaps this is just regular political international bullying that's now going to be part of American diplomacy. But even if it's not going to make Canada a 51st state, it certainly doesn't make Canadians very happy with us. And why would you want to do that? Why would you want to go in that direction and make your closest allies upset at you is one question, but how easily you can do that, that's remarkable. And so making peace for Ukraine in 24 hours may be very, very difficult for a number of reasons, starting with the fact that Trump really doesn't have any leverage over Putin. Neither does Biden. That's why the only thing we can do is arm Ukraine and wait for Russian regime to, I don't know, come to its senses, collapse, something, change. But 24 hours approach, it was flawed if Biden would have proposed it. It doesn't make sense if Trump proposes. It does make sense in one possible approach. If 24 hours is the time with which you could say that Donald Trump could put an end to permissions for Ukraine to use weapons deep inside Russian territory, withdraw any permission for Ukraine to use American weapons, anything within his executive power, and then on top of that, you add Elon Musk with his a lot of ability and capacity to control internet and communication in Ukraine, and 24 hours can seem a pretty reasonable amount of time to accomplish those things and leave Ukraine in a very bad position, after which, something else can occur. And that's important to remember, too, is that Trump can try to sell out Ukraine. And Trump can try to sell out America by saying, you know what, TikTok is not so bad. Let's leave TikTok here as long as everybody's happy. Who is everybody? I guess Trump. And if Trump is happy, then TikTok can remain in the United States and harvest the information of Americans so we can be sold out to China, and Ukraine can be sold out to Russia. But in the end, we decide if we're going to go on TikTok. The Ukrainians decide if they're in agreement with this plan. Europeans decide how they feel about this plan, because I think it is pretty clear that Russian ambitions are expanding. The closer Trump is to White House, the more we hear about Russia invading this former Soviet republic, another former Soviet republic, many of which are now NATO countries. So that brings us to a conversation of how willing and how much are people expecting the United States to do in case of Russian aggression, that Article 5 that everybody talks about, that attack on one country is attack on all countries. How is all of that going to work when the warranty is secured by the United States? And if the United States are not willing to secure that warranty, then the whole international order is coming apart. And then we're just starting to observe how boundaries are going to change. And this is throwing our world back to pre-World War I and the age of empires again. It's on one hand, it's a very clear vision. On the other hand, there's a lot of people who oppose this clear vision. And now we're going to see how this is going to play out, considering the challenges that Trump and Elon Musk are already experiencing with MAGA movement, because MAGA movement is anti-immigration. Elon Musk is pro at least some kind of a type of immigration. And Donald Trump at this point has taken side of Elon Musk, not the side of MAGA. What will occur now? Will MAGA just fold under Elon Musk, essentially an immigrant to the United States himself? And let him dictate our policy? How this is going to play out is going to take more than 24 hours to see. But to expect that Donald Trump, with all of these circumstances, will be able to solve the situation in 24 hours, there's no pressure points that he has access to that can achieve that in 24 hours, short of actually using American military to strike Kremlin if Putin doesn't sit down at the negotiation table in 24 hours. And that's going to be the last thing that Donald Trump is going to do, is to force Putin to do anything. So I think that we can see several things that can occur within 24 to 48 hours. But that doesn't mean that war will necessarily be over in the way that anybody, including Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin, thinks it can end.
Every year, the journal The Economist makes review to next year with different risks and with different thoughts and opinions about how it can be next year. And one of the editors of The Economist, John Prideaux, reported that if President Trump can end the war in Ukraine without capitulating to Russia and secure a lasting peace between Israel and the Palestinians, he will leave a legacy legacy that will surpass that of any president since Ronald Reagan. This is something to strive for, thinks John Prideaux. But if I understand correct, Donald Trump doesn't want such fate like Ronald Reagan and such aims. Or maybe does he want to achieve such aims in his life, political life?
That's several good questions, Irina, because if we look at predictions for next year, we can all make our best predictions, but then reality on the ground and then what happens in Ukraine is going to determine how much of those predictions are true and accurate. We can talk about things that Donald Trump can accomplish, and I think that brings me to the possibility of appealing to vanity. In a sense that Nobel Peace Prize has a purpose. And if that purpose can be accomplished and Ukraine can have peace, long-lasting, I don't know, but at least lasting peace, some promise and assurances of long-lasting peace, then that certainly is worth being reviewed by a Nobel awarding committee, because I think that if I don't care, and I think a lot of people would not care, what kind of, if there was peace that people felt good about for Ukraine, if the American president at the time, whoever that was acknowledged for their efforts. I think regardless of what that president's name is, if they're able to do the job, they should be recognized. And then there's a question of to what extent any of this is realistic. But let's leave that for the end. First of all, Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan, yes, those were two politicians that have done harm and good to because they were influential politicians, and to say that Donald Trump would want to be like them is saying a lot, because Donald Trump keeps changing his mind. So it's hard to say. He probably was at some point kind of like all of them at any given time. But Ronald Reagan understood the danger and threat of Soviet Union and Russia very clearly. Margaret Thatcher understood danger and threat of Russia very clearly. A lot of their policies were driven by their understanding of the threat that comes from the Soviet Union. And it is hard to see how this next administration will approach things with the same set of priorities at all. Now, it is possible that because there's an element of praise to it, that a person who likes being praised doesn't particularly care who he's being compared to, as long as he's being praised. So on that level, it's convenient. It's also convenient because there's many Republicans who still feel a certain sense of allegiance to Ronald Reagan, and still feel a certain sense of that there was an America that they could believe in. And I feel like that can be a decreasing number of people in today's America. So necessarily appealing to being like Reagan isn't even the best selling point within the United States, because Democrats never particularly cared for Ronald Reagan, and far from majority of Republicans hold Reagan in high esteem anymore. So it's because isolationism, at least when it comes to ideology, is about being isolated, and Reagan was not an isolationist. So whether Donald Trump is actually in reality an isolationist or not, he could be very involved. He's got a lot of interests all over the world. So it's not necessarily, it sounds almost strange and counterintuitive when we interpret his populism as isolationism. It's just really more about pulling us out of agreements with our allies and resetting how we're approaching the world. And I think that's where the direction of the next administration is likely to focus.
So, Yuri, when we, as you mentioned, when we are talking about the redistribution of spheres of influence in the whole world, will Donald Trump start a real trade war against China? How do you think?
It seems unlikely at this point, because, again, the rhetoric was very anti-China, And in fact, it's even President Biden who had a last meeting with Xi Jinping and said that here Xi Jinping and said that that China should not distance itself, or should continue to reproach with the United States. And I'm not President Biden, but it seems that with the kind of people that are going to be running the country, it seems very unlikely that we're going to distance ourselves from China, or that China is going to particularly distance itself from us, because Elon Musk has such vast interests in China and he has so much influence, as we just saw with the immigration debate in the United States, where Donald Trump took side of Elon Musk over his own followers, that China is actually in pretty good shape as far as the United States are concerned, not to mention that China and Russia and the countries that have strong authoritarian leaderships seem to be North Korea, are countries with whom Donald Trump has an easier time communicating and finding common ground. So while China is going to be likely continue to be a threat, if not an actual clear and present threat, to Taiwan, and who knows if China will attempt to take over Taiwan, it is the question is to what extent the United States are going to be there to for multitudes of reasons, from sphere of influence to wanting to argue or not wanting to argue with a strong man and letting him or her have what they want, because that's how the new world order is going to operate. Within all of these parameters, it's hard to imagine a war between China and United States, or at least armed conflict. Trade conflicts, perhaps, as these attempted strongmen try to find their, balance out their relationship from financial, perhaps in, business interest point of view. But I can only think back to World War II, where Hitler and Stalin made a deal, and they thought that everything was going to be great. And then, as they say in Russian, Hitler broke faith. So the only person that Stalin has ever trusted, Hitler, broke his faith. It's just so terrible of Hitler to break Stalin, because Stalin really believed in him. But what happened is what happened, and just the fact that two dictators can find common ground against all these weak, weird, strange democracies doesn't mean that dictators will be peaceful with each other. And I think we're seeing that between Trump and Elon Musk, and over time, who knows what tensions we will see between just the general strong men of this planet. But the question is to what extent they'll be able to realize their desires because of the number of people who oppose them. Still, I think it is hard in the immediate future to see an armed conflict between China and the United States. If anything, it's likely to see an improvement of relations.
Ukraine's accession to NATO is still on the agenda, but it is not a priority aspiration. The focus is now on the issue of security guarantees. This was stated by the permanent representative of Ukraine to the United Nations, Andriy Melnik, in an interview with the Berliner Morgenpost. What kind of security guarantees could there be, and what countries are ready to provide us with such security guarantees? Perhaps we will see Lend-Lease, for example, from the USA, or something similar to the format in which the USA and Israel cooperate?
I think that President Biden is leaving President-elect Trump a lot of levers of leverage against Putin's regime, and the way to increase the cost for Putin's regime, and also to ensure his own legacy, Biden's legacy, by giving Trump a lot of ways to help Ukraine going forward. But security guarantees in this situation can only be security guarantees that the only way to back Ukrainian security is Ukrainian armed forces. And I think that is really important to understand for everyone. But it's also important to understand in this, I've been in this media atmosphere for a while now, and it amazes me to what extent people view United States as a superpower, to what extent they think that the United States can do anything it wants. And I feel like it must be a result of work of propaganda, because if you tell everybody that America can do whatever it wants because America is so amazing and so powerful, and that America doesn't do something, anything, well, then this is America, a country that has but chooses not to do this, that, or the other. And so it immediately puts it's a no-win game where America projects strength and at the same time cannot lose anything, and its enemies will always try to display that America is showing weakness here, showing weakness there. But when it comes to the next administration and our alliances, I'm not even sure to what extent NATO is going to continue play its pivotal role, because right now we see Vladimir Putin is afraid of attacking NATO countries. Will he be still afraid to attack NATO countries after January 20th is an open question, because all of those guarantees reside on the shoulders of, frankly, President of the United States, who has to say, no, this is too far. You cannot do this. We feel that this treaty is being violated, and therefore we're going to have an armed military response, because we see that the United States president has an incredible amount of capacity to direct foreign policy. And this would be a matter of foreign policy. Now, it can be argued this is a matter of national defense, national security, but I think that in Trump world, it can be those alliances and the concepts of national security are just going to be viewed differently than they have been up to this point. And so the idea of protecting borders of any individual country, because if you don't protect the borders of one country, it's going to mean that any borders can be changed, and we're now just back to strong and weak states, and this destroys world order as we had it after World War II, is a bad thing. Then you're going to have one set of actions, and if you think it's a good thing, because we need to get rid of this strange restraining world order that won't let strong men do what they want to do, then you're going to have just a totally different set of reactions to violations of these treaties. Good, like it was supposed to fall apart, and there it did. It showed that it could not do what it was designed to do. Is therefore a failure of another democratic institution is if NATO is not able to support its members. Can you imagine how bad the democracies will look if NATO is not able to function? Now, we see this all the time when one party tries to gain upper hand by just sticking sticks in the wheels of another party, and then claiming that because there's a failure due to the efforts, then that means that the other party needs to lose election and be kicked out of power. So this kind of idea of strategic malevolence works. And so if NATO is not able to do what it's supposed to do, and it functions and it exists, then I guess it's a failure of NATO, the same way that we see United Nations, that could be a very useful and important organization in the world, but instead is just a target for criticism for its ineffectiveness. In a way, it displays ineffectiveness of democratic institutions to address problems of people. And therefore, it's important for us to just understand that institutions are people. And if you have good people in those institutions who fight for those institutions, then they're going to prevail, and those alliances are going to prevail. And therefore, we're going to see a lot of resistance to Trump policies within the United States, because there's a lot of people, nearly half the country, that voted against him. But when it comes to foreign policy, the president has a lot of independence from Congress and a lot of leadership capacity, and we know how Donald Trump tends to use that leadership.
Yuri, thank you very much. Thank you for this conversation. Yes, we really want to believe that such institutions are really strong and effective, and their tools can work in real practice. Thank you. See you next week. Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Yuri Rashkin, host of YouTube channel Rashkin Report at Rashkin Report in English, was with us. Thank you. And my name is Uzlova. See you later. Take care of yourself. Goodbye.